host, so I think it's possible.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Tal Dekel. I'm from the Kibbutzim College in Israel and also Tel Aviv University. I'm head of the Visual Literacy Studies at my institution. And I'm very happy to present this morning my talk, Feminist Art Activism in Israel in Intersectional Analysis in a Divided Society, which is actually a research I conducted with my colleague, Lior Elephant. So I will start sharing my screen. And everybody can see my PowerPoint presentation? Lovely.
Yes, yeah.
So feminist art that relates to local sensitivities, local needs, and in its inequalities is a fundamental approach to the many cultures and groups of women within any country. The use of intersectional analysis, one that considers the relative and dynamic positions of oppression in which women from various social groups are positioned in, according to identity categories such as race, class, gender, religion, physical ability, etc., is, we find, the most useful analysis and approach for us. In selecting the artworks from among many, we chose pieces that received broad public exposure and high visibility and impact. We chose art that managed to enter the mainstream through social institution or public spaces that are popular. That is, the works that we discuss all had public exposure beyond small neighborhood galleries or small venues of any sort. As a result, this talk does not discuss activist art in Israel of Palestinian women or Ethiopian-born artists, although we acknowledge their great importance. The first part of my talk deals with one of the most common practices in feminist activism, raising awareness in public spaces about gender inequality in the art world through counting, monitoring, and presenting statistics, not with no special attention to intersectionality at first. Part two will consider collective feminist activism of ultra-Orthodox women in public spaces, aiming to manifest daily incidents and struggles of women. And part three will deal with women immigrants as they struggle against oppression and marginalization under ethno-nationalism. So let's start with the first. First is the feminist institutional critique with the Israeli take, so to speak. Institutional critique, which took root in the West in the mid-20th century, aimed its critical arrows at the art institution in the world and those who headed them, while exposing the covert powers relations in the field. Nonetheless, this critique was not limited to writing by art theoreticians and critics. Artists also began to express their protest and their criticism of shortcomings within the art world in their own world. So in 1916, artist Einat Amir collected data on gender inequality in the Israeli art world. In the activist spirit of the Guerrilla Girls and such, Amir invited 5 women artists to join her and design t-shirts that displays these findings and statistics, which would be sold on to the public at large as merchandise. One of the t-shirts, for example, noted this encouraging statistics. Solo shows in the Israeli Museum and Tel Aviv Museum, 70% men, 30% women. Another said in the Biennale, the Israeli representatives, 12% women, men, 88%, etc., etc. As part of the ongoing artwork, Amir asked her male teachers, professors in the Midrasha Faculty of the Arts in Bet Berel College, one of the most respected art academies in Israel, to wear these t-shirts with the incriminating data that thereby exhibit their inequalities for which they themselves, as prominent and influential male professors, were largely responsible. And we see one important, very well-known professor on the right, and then another one on the left. And they're wearing that. One is in the front of the Tel Aviv Museum, one is at the college academy. So the this is one example. I'm rushing over to the next part to show work that has to do with collective work, religion, class, and gender. And now we go into intersectional analysis. In Jerusalem, a group of feminist, religious, Jewish women belonging to the art collective Studio Mishalach in Hebrew, in English, a studio of their own, organized an outdoor exhibition entitled In Her Own Image. And it was to mark the International Women's Day in 1917 that we just celebrated yet again the other day. So this exhibition emerged from a workshop run by Jerusalem Community Center, Yad Sarah, which taught photography using smartphones to religious and ultra-Orthodox religious women who had survived domestic violence, and they come from low-income backgrounds. Images for the exhibitions were created by all involved, the instructors, the staff, including the social workers, the family community center director, and of course, the women themselves who had experienced the domestic violence. All were committed at the same level to the artistic process, and all contributed images as equal. Two urban venues in Midtown Jerusalem, the Schatz Pedestrian Mall and the Bezalel Street, were selected as the public space for the exhibition. These are trendy gathering places, locations of artistic activity, and in close proximity to well-known art institutions. The venues were chosen to give the women who experienced violence not only a sense that their artistic capabilities deserve a real exhibition, but also to give public exposure to them and their painful life stories, in contrast to the years and years of concealment and shame of their oppression in their abusive family setting, which in the Israeli context has special social characteristics, as they all come from, as I explained, from ultra-Orthodox communities who tend to be much less cooperative with the police and any kind of authorities when domestic violence occurs, and actually cover up domestic violence in marriage because of their extreme conservative community norms. The photos by the women were hung on the street lights poles, as you see, and this was an intrusion into mainstream urban normative space. Thus, one could see passing pedestrians, women, men, secular, religious, lifting their eyes to the streets, to the street lights, to look at the artworks overhead. Striking among the photos was, for instance, an image of wet laundry hanging, on the right, hanging laundry out to dry, alluding to the cover-up and concealment of the violence the women experienced in their homes. Another photo that we do not see here captures a window display of a store no longer in business, two armless and legless mannequins, one upright and the other prone on the floor falling, indicate the neglect and violence clearly evident in the entire scene. And here we see on the left a photo of a Chanukiah, yes, a Jewish religious symbol of the mighty fight of darkness versus light and the heroic overcoming of light in our context, of course, ending of the silence about the domestic abuse and bringing it into light. The third part that I wanted to share with you today has to do with curatorial activism and becoming minor in the sense of gender, immigration, and ethno-nationalism. Mauro O'Reilly has coined the term curatorial activism to refer to the organizing of art exhibition of sensitivity or urgency, a campaign, a social agency, I quote, and actually it still has to do with this exhibition, attempting to ensure that under or unrepresented people, subjects, the silence are actually exhibited, no longer ignored. The curator becomes an activist. The aim is to be constantly counter-hegemonic. This is the end of quote from Maura Riley, right? So Riley notes the need to curate exhibitions of women artists and feminist art in particular, as well as by others, as curatorial corrective actions whose purpose is to end the exclusion of women's art. Curatorial activism describes precisely the collective project of Studio of Her Own and the perspective of its curators Noga Greenberg, Eliael, Horen Danino. However, it also goes beyond this because this project highlights the strong sense of being a stranger in one's own town, which is characteristic of women in public spaces. This sense of foreignness is better described as a realization of the politics, indicating how to overturn the politics of becoming minor that holds a real possibility of resistance. The political function of concept being minor or becoming actually minor is derived from the writing, of course, of philosopher Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. And if to quote, Minocracy is a political action aimed at undermining the forces of oppression, resisting the powers of authority, escaping the inevitability of violence, end of quote. Identification with a group that is becoming minor is an ongoing process that continues to challenge the values of the majority order. And this is exactly what this project is about. So now, only now I go on to the third part, I'm sorry, immigration, gender, and ethno-nationalism. At this point, I just need to make a pause and explain to those not familiar with the subject in the context of Israel, a few words. Jewish identity in the state of Israel extends beyond religion to incorporate questions of nationality, citizenship, and belonging. Israel has a unique model of nationality which distinguishes between Jews and non-Jews. I'm sorry. Because religion matters and state matters are not fully separated, Jews who are not recognized as such by the rabbinical authorities have reduced civil rights in the domain of, especially in the domain of personal status such as marriage. And not less important, are burdened with derogative stereotypes. One of the most challenging gender issues, for instance, I'm taking here a case study of former Soviet Union women in Israel, relates to the stereotype of the Russian prostitute. An example of the artist's preoccupation with this deep-rooted stereotype is found in this installation by Vanane Boryan and Alex Korbatov. This construction and perpetuation of stereotypes about former Soviet Union migrants as prostitutes is strikingly evident in the Israeli media in general, and in particularly in the printed press. But I want to pause here and say something. What we are looking at is the Rothschild Boulevard in Israel, in Tel Aviv, one of the very high, posh places. And it's actually an installation, what we see on the right, of a huge vagina with like a red carpet made all out of what we can see on the left. I hope you can recognize, unfortunately, it's all these calling cards for exploiting women in the sex industry that we often find in the urban places. So this is what it's made of. So according to many research that has been done basically in sociology, we see that the majority of media references to former Soviet Union in Israel throughout the 1990s relates to prostitution. The actual body of such women thus turns into an active site for marking the national boundaries, as explains anthropologist Deborah Golden. According to Golden, the potential coupling of Jewish men with hundreds of thousands of Russian women newcomers who came since the 1990s into Israel, whose Jewishness is doubted according, of course, to the halakha and the rabbis, not according to citizens, regular citizens, has become the source of national existential fear The gender aspect is acute, of course, since the ratio of women and men was imbalanced. More women than men came into the country from those countries after the collapse of the Soviet bloc. And just to show yet another work that Alex Korbatov and Vanane Boria did, this is a performance that Alex Korbatov did. And of course, she's lying in South Tel Aviv, in Rehov Sharon, which is well known for having sex trafficking victims having to work for their pimps in those streets and the apartments, discrete apartments. So she's lying bare naked on the floor, on the concrete floor, covered only with those, of course, little cards. So, of course, in parentheses, I will say that these stereotypes had nothing to do with the Jewish aliyah coming into the Israel after Chok HaShvut and all the citizenship they require as Jews coming to their homeland, their ancient homeland. But I will say that the stereotype of Russian women as prostitutes has also, unfortunately, roots in the concrete reality, the terrible phenomena of sex trafficking of ex-Soviet women into the West, we know, was especially evident in the 1990s, right after the collapse of the communist bloc. But these that came into the country, were smuggled into the country in sex trafficking, had nothing to do with Jewishness and nationalism and coming to get citizenship. And the Israelis had, the veterans had this mix-up of who came as a Jewish to return to the homeland and who is there for as a victim, as sex trafficked woman. To conclude, I think I have only 5 minutes, Garciela, right? So I will say this few words to conclude. The example of activist feminist works of art in Israel are linked to the notion of becoming minor in the very essence of the oppositional and radical position politics it entails. Moreover, it is art created to foster and promote discourse about a wide variety of gender, class, ethnical, national, and religious issues, and dialogue between diverse women from different social groups. Some works do this through humor or irony. Others use controlled rage or overt anger and protest, yet others use critical performative recreation. The feminist activist art discussed here, and a lot of others that we did not have time to see today, create a vast range of subjects that become a tool to connect with and build audiences for reflexive thinking about local burning issues. There are many common denominators between Israeli artists involved in feminist activism and artists doing similar works in other countries. However, the local frameworks of the artists based in Israel makes them distinct in many ways that influence their strategies and the content of their work. This local framework does not overlook issues that are global concerned, shared in many different ways by countless women, such as motherhood, sexuality, the labor market, but burning local issues are also addressed, among them chauvinism and militarism, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, ethnic minorities and immigration, conflicting religion backgrounds, and civil rights in the state of Israel. I will stop here and I will thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank
I will
you.
stop my share here.
Thank you.